So thank you to each and everyone who came out to be with us today. We get to practice being in spiritual community, even though we're still virtual for a bit yet. And we're grateful for each and everyone who chose to be part of this spiritual community in our virtual world, because we know you have lots of choices. And today we start a new month of Sundays and a new monthly theme, the power back of creation. The description for this month's theme: divine mind, through the aspects of love and law, provide the power and substance behind all creative acts. Do you recognize and nurture it when you experience it? So this month, we're going to be looking at how we create, including on March 21st, when we have a guest musician and speaker, Robin Hackett, who has written a book about the creativity of the individual. But anyway, that notion of our ability to use the creative power that's operating in us and as us will be the theme for the whole month. So question: how do we let the divine express in our lives? And what does that mean? What does that mean for each one of us? Almost all of the week's readings in the Science of Mind textbook were from the chapter on the power of thought. Ernest Holmes, Science of Mind, page 140, paragraphs 3 and 4. We need not coerce. We do not create this power, but we must let this great power operate through us. In the infinity of mind, there's nothing but mind and what mind does, its operations. This mind is acted upon by our thoughts, and in this way, thought becomes the law of our lives. In the written text, that's italicized. He wants to point it out. This is important. This mind is acted upon by our thoughts, and in this way, thought becomes the law of our lives. It's just as much a law in our individual lives as God's thought is in the larger life of the universe. So think about that for a second. God's thought, the divine mind's thought, eternal presence thought, whatever name you wish to use for it, set the world in motion and continues to set the world in motion that we all experience. In the same way that the right percentage of oxygen is in the air for us to breathe, and the balance of us and plants, including microscopic ones, keep us able to function and interact in this world on which we live. The cycles of the season, the cycles of the moon, happen without any attention on anybody's part, and they just flow, they just cycle. And what created that in the beginning, and what continues to move that, is God's thought, or the divine idea of life. It lets the hummingbirds know how to find the tubular flowers that have nectar, and the sandhill cranes, who don't need any maps or directions to get from where they winter to where they live the rest of the year. The important part for us, our thought does the same thing for each one of us. Ernest Holmes continues, we do not create. We use the power of the one mind, which creates for us. Our beliefs and our deep-seated convictions inevitably outpicture, which is a very old-fashioned word for shows up, and reflect themselves in our experience and our environment, both in the physical condition of our bodies and the larger world of our experience, our affairs. What we outwardly are and what we are to become depend on what we are thinking. For this is the way we use the creative power. This is a really big deal. Each one of us already has been given full access, 24/7, to all the creative power in the universe. What we use, how we use it, depends on how we think, how we look at our world, how we believe the world works, what we feel like we can have or should have, or can be trusted with having, or trusted with using. These are major factors in our experience of our creative use of the power that exists. And these are some of the things that can get in our way. What limits us is never life or circumstances or what somebody else does to us. It's always our perception and our response. Ernest Holmes again from page 141. Our thought, centered in mind, uses the creative power of the universe. Law of life is a law of thought, an activity of consciousness, the power that flows through us. The spirit can do for us only what it can do through us. Unless we are able to provide the consciousness, it cannot make the gift. You know about the golden rule, right? And the platinum rule. Do unto others, blah, blah, blah. Did you also know there's a lead rule? Do unto others what we most fear being done to us. How do we avoid falling into the trap of the lead rule? The answer, conscious awareness and intentional attention, are the only things that can stop the lead rule from being the most operative, the most active rule in our lives. If we think fearful thoughts, we live in fear, we act in fear, and we are stuck playing and living defensive lives. The same is true about doubt or worry or anxiety. Those things are not who we are. They are not what we are. It is who we forget, and we sometimes think we are, and we sometimes believe we are, when we forget our divine inheritance. The Roots of the Science of Mind class finished their 4-week overview of Thomas Troward last week. This week, they start a very fast 4-week look at some of the writings of Emma Curtis Hopkins. Emma was a mystic, and she believed in the omnipresence of the divine, period. That's it. That's what she believed. And she believed it was possible to maintain her consciousness in omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence of the divine. It makes interesting reading her and listening to her and thinking about her and her way of being in the world. She had absolutely no tolerance for discussion, wondering out loud, or pondering. She knew what she knew. She said what she knew. She knew that her students knew it too. They just forgot and needed to be reminded. For a short span of time, she had a seminary and ordained ministers. She transmitted what she knew to tens of thousands of people in classrooms, in small groups, and one-on-one. Ernest Holmes sat with her late in her life for her 12 lectures and was impressed by her clarity and her emanation of the presence of the divine that moved through her and flowed through her and was present in her lived experience. She talked incessantly about the power back of creation and how we must have one pointed focus, claim it and use it. Holmes, just like Holmes and all the other New Thought teachers she spoke to, She spoke predominantly to individuals with strong Christian backgrounds, but not to those wedded to the theology of the traditional church. She taught something that initially seemed really startling. It was printed in chapter 1 of the material for the Roots class this week, Scientific Christian Mental Practice. She said and she wrote, "The good which you seek is your God, and my good is my God." At first, this sounds really odd to our ears, but when we read on, we begin to understand and realize that she makes a lot of sense. Regardless of whatever good we desire, whether it's love or power or wisdom or strength or health or support or defense or truth or substance. On page 25, she wrote, of Scientific Christian Mental Practice, she wrote, "The expectancy of good has been a long time waiting for us to declare what our expectations are. To expect good and to be very definite in our mind that it is coming is to see it coming." She also wrote on page 29, "Write down the names of your good you are seeking. Think over the names of the good you are seeking. That will be naming God. And such a practice will manifest in your life. God is not slow to come into the life of them who acknowledge the good." Her clarity and focus were remarkable. She had the experience of the good she sought. And she taught people who were willing to hear and practice a way for them to do it too. Genevieve Behrend, who was the only student of Thomas Troward, did the same thing, but her tact, her way of approaching it was different. Those of you who took Prosperity Plus 2 probably still have her little book, Your Invisible Power. I'll pick one tiny piece of her story to illustrate how someone who really wasn't all that special, but was able to hold on to their vision of their good and manifest it with focus and intention, and without a lot of effort. It's really pretty amazing. She was a widow with a small monthly allowance, living in New York State, and she stumbled onto a copy of Thomas Troward's writings. She decided she wanted to go study with him in England. And we're talking over 100 years ago, so it's not like easy to do this. So she wrote him a letter and asked if she could, if he would take her as a student. He said no, but keep writing. So she wrote him again and asked him again, and he said no again. And she wrote him again and asked him again, and he said no again and again and again and again and again. And he kept saying no. And she wasn't deterred because she knew what her good was. So still with his no ringing in her mind, she started seeing herself in her mind as a center of divine operation, something she'd gotten from his writings. And she started visualizing what it would take for her to go study with him. She started visualizing the money that it would take to travel to England on a steamer ship and live there for several months, which she didn't have. She started visualizing it. She started imagining herself at every stage of the experience on the deck of the steamer ship, waving to the people on the shore, in a carriage, riding up to his front door, standing on his doorstep and knocking on his door, being invited in, and sitting in his sitting room with him, and him changing his mind and agreeing to teach her. And then studying with him and learning enough to be able to teach others what she learned from him. Can you see this process? Can you see the focus and the intention that it would take to imagine all the steps so clearly that they were already real? That's what she did. And she describes that in her book and describes exactly how it showed up. But what she did was conscious awareness, intentional focus. And that same ability and skill is available to each and every one of us as we choose, right? She used the power back of creation, and it manifested her good for her. We each have this capacity, just like Genevieve. What stops us? Well, in Stephen Pressfield's little book, The War of Art, on page 55, he wrote, "Resistance is fear, but resistance is too cunning to show itself naked in this form." Why? Because if resistance let us see clearly that it was our own fear preventing us from doing our work, we might feel shame, and shame might drive us to act in the face of fear. Resistance doesn't want us to do this, so it brings along its friend rationalization. Rationalization is resistance's spin doctor. It's resistance's way of hiding the big stick behind its back. Instead of showing us our fear, which might shame us and impel us to do our work, resistance presents us with a series of plausible, rational justifications for why we shouldn't do our work. What's particularly insidious about rationalizations is that a lot of them are true. They're legitimate. What resistance leaves out is that all of those justifications don't actually mean diddly squat. When we have fixed our intentions and our attention on our good, our God, we have all the power back of creation on our side. So I'm going to close with a reading from Daniel Lee Morgan, a retired CSL minister from the Guidance CSL in Los Angeles. His book, Guidance for a Spiritual Journey, is one of the texts we occasionally use for daily morning practice. This is today's reading. The true significance of the word meek in the Bible is that mental attitude which is the secret of prosperity or success in prayer. It is a combination of open-mindedness and faith in God. There is a mystery about meekness, a gentle receptivity that so consciously recognizes its oneness with the whole, its oneness in the whole. It can effectively practice non-resistance. This state of mind also includes a perfect willingness to allow the will of God to come about in whatever way divine wisdom considers the best, rather than in some particular way we have chosen for ourselves. For maximum realization and demonstration of all that life has in store for me, it is essential that I continually prepare myself for demonstration through maximum receptivity, being open and aware and attentive, listening, and saying yes. To stand still and see the way opening is no idle aphorism. My power to demonstrate is based on my awareness of the overarching indwelling presence. The great cosmic secret is that I have my good now. My recognition of this truth and of my oneness with it gives me the feeling of it's already done. This agreement is back behind all demonstration. I'm glad God is real. And then a short piece that you'll all recognize, Ladinsky in the style of Hafiz. The small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful rowdy prisoners. We are each the sage. We are each the small man. We are each the prisoner. We are each that one that moves ourselves forward and stops ourselves from moving in the direction of our good, our God, by whatever name. We get to pay attention to our lives. We get to pay attention to what matters to us and what we are willing to do, regardless of what the world presents to us that seems to be in the way. So decide what your good looks like and move in that direction. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and move into the prayer and imagine the good for yourself, whatever that is, and hold that in the front of your mind while I speak the words. I know this divine love lives as me and as each one. I know it as that infinite radiant presence, that power that occupies all space and all time and all beings and expresses as each one now and desires to express even more as each one of us opens up to some greater good that we wish to share with the world. So I see the now and I feel grateful for the now and for the awareness, the level of awareness that exists in me and in each one. And I know there is even more good that wishes to surface, that wishes to be expressed and shared and blossom and bless others. So I celebrate this ability each and all have to be their divine inheritance, to express their divine inheritance, to show up as the divine as themselves. And I know that the universe is for expression and expansion and more good. So I celebrate this opportunity each one has to practice and explore and express. And I know that joy and delight are the natural result of this practice. So I celebrate this opportunity to remember and know. I celebrate this opportunity to practice and express. And I celebrate the joy with which each one of us lives. Feeling great gratitude to be part of this conversation this morning, I relax into the great good and I let it be. And so it is.